news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. The rematch, the long-awaited, long-anticipated second fight between Alicia Baumgardner, the champion, and Christina Linardatou, the challenger. The difference in the rematch from what we saw in the first fight, well, Alicia is a more experienced fighter now than she was when she initially met Christina Linardatou. In that first fight, you saw that the activity and the aggression and the come-forwardness of Linardatou, it was flustering Alicia. It was more than she was used to at that time, whereas this time she exhibited a lot more poise.
Manifested in the form of control, range control.
Not panicking and not being flustered, not giving up too much real estate, too much ground to allow Christina Linardatou to gain momentum, staying just on the outside of Christina's punches, but close enough to get off her own. The jab.
That was the difference.
From the first fight to the second one. Distance control.
The jab.
Counter jab, the counter uppercuts, the body work. Alicia Baumgardner was a lot more calm and composed in this fight than she was in the first one, because she is now a far more experienced and versatile fighter than she was when she first met Christina. Whereas Christina, in terms of nuts and bolts and strategy, she hasn't changed much.
Nope.
Pressure fighters, they don't often change much fight by fight.
Rematches are often won by the fighter that can make the most adjustments, that being Alicia more than Christina.
A noticeable difference in Alicia in the second fight than what we saw in the first. She wasn't giving up as much ground. She was circling Christina Linardatou, staying with her, staying on her, just outside of Christina's striking distance, but still close enough to get off the counters if she comes forward.
Christina's approach was too simple for today's Alicia Baumgardner.
Swaying side to side, keeping her head off the line, trying to jab her way in with a very short jab, a double jab.
Attempting to inch forward and being countered by Alicia Baumgardner's lead hand several times throughout the course of this fight. We even saw a little bit of switch hitting from Alicia, seamlessly transitioning from orthodox to southpaw, back to orthodox.
I want to say that Alicia showed a little bit of everything yesterday in Detroit. She looked more the boxer-puncher than the pure boxer, the economic fighter, the defensively-minded fighter. Alicia Baumgardner was definitely offensively-minded yesterday.
Good durability from Christina. She took a lot of hard shots upstairs, hard shots downstairs, those body shots.
The uppercuts up the middle that were splitting Christina's guard, those counter uppercuts, those body shots just under the elbow and right in the midsection.
The jabs, the counter jabs, she was getting hit with everything.
Though she wore the punches well, even though she looked to be in trouble several times throughout the course of this fight, getting back into the ropes as Alicia really laid into her. Christina showed great durability and the heart of a champion, not giving up, not giving in.
Still losing wide on my card. I had this fight 8 rounds to 2, 8 rounds to 2, maybe 7 rounds to 3 in favor of Alicia Baumgardner, though really 8 rounds to 2. I think Christina's best rounds were probably rounds 5 and definitely round 6.
I think round 6 was the best round of the whole fight for Christina Linardatou, really trying to pour it on thick, come on strong, and back off Alicia, though it didn't take Alicia that long to regain control of this fight. Stopping Christina at the door whenever she tried to inch forward. She'd eat jabs, counter jabs, body shots.
The star of the show for Alicia Baumgardner wasn't necessarily any one punch or any one thing that she did so much as her calmness, her stillness.
She wasn't flustered, she wasn't panicking, she wasn't giving Christina Linardatou enough ground to barrel forward and gain momentum in doing so. She was right there with her in the pocket.
Christina was second best at every turn.
Still durable, still explosive, and still strong, but still just a step behind Alicia Baumgardner for most of this fight. Her approach was too simple, and Alicia had already seen it before. She knew what to expect.
Knew how to react.
Alicia's offensive arsenal for what is normally a defensively minded fighter was thoroughly impressive. You know, the short hooks, the uppercuts, the jabs, the straights, the looping rights.
Boxing being a game of inches, Alicia's distance control was impeccable.
Boxing being a game of inches, it's a matter of inches. Being able to slip a punch and counter in kind, counter successfully. Alicia Baumgardner made a statement, in my opinion, and even though she didn't stop Christina, she came very close several times.
Credit to Christina for finishing the fight on her feet and enduring what she endured. What I saw yesterday was a fighter that...
Christina is still strong, still dangerous, and still formidable. incredible. And even if 130 pounds here today isn't the best weight for her, at 135, 140, and 147,
I still think she can give a lot of girls a run for their money at or around those weights, and she's still a very entertaining fighter to watch. Lots of personality.
To have endured what she endured yesterday in Detroit, she's still a world-class fighter. She was just a step behind, just second best to Alycia Baumgardner. Congratulations to her. I felt she would avenge the loss this weekend, and that's exactly what she did. We then come to the main event of the Showtime card, the battle of the unbeatens in the men's lightweight division. Frank Martin, Errol Spence Jr.'s up-and-coming prospect, versus Artem Harytunyan.
And the feeling that Frank Martin was exposed by the little-known fighter, the little-known Olympic bronze medalist, Artem Harytunyan.
That Frank Martin got off to a slow start in the first half of the fight, that Frank was a little bit too tentative and didn't like the pressure, the aggressiveness of Artem Harytunyan, that
he didn't look good.
He acknowledged that himself in the post-fight interview with Jim Gray, that he was off. His timing was a bit off. He just wasn't as effective as he usually is. In truth, yesterday's fight with Artem Harytunyan, for me and my money, was a return to the Frank Martin that we saw in the Jackson Marinez fight.
Not the Frank Martin that we saw in his last fight with Michelle Rivera, the fight before last.
The fight with Jackson Marinez, where he was eating a lot of right hands, and Frank Martin, being a southpaw, leading with his right hand to set up his left, taking in as many right hands as he did from Jackson Marinez, an orthodox fighter, or rather long and limber one.
I wasn't impressed.
Opposite the ring, a more interesting puncher, a bigger puncher than a Jackson Marinez. Taking that many right hands could prove fatal. And while he temporarily
might have temporarily redeemed himself in the Michelle Rivera fight, yesterday's showing was nothing to write home about, starting off at a clear deficit to Artem Harytunyan.
Put the squeeze on Frank Martin a bit and put on display that Frank can dish it out, but he really can't take it. He doesn't like it.
Pressure.
Wasn't wearing those body shots too well from Artem, and that he was rendered tentative due to Artem Harytunyan's aggressiveness and activity at the start and the early goings of the fight going into the half.
Clear deficit.
The very distressed Derek James in the latter portion of the fight, urging his man on, feeling that the fight was slipping away and that Frank might need a knockout to win. You saw him.
So I'm trying to wake Frank up.
There's a legitimate argument that Artem Harytunyan did enough to eke past Frank Martin. There's a legitimate argument that Frank should have lost yesterday, though. If nothing else, the takeaway is that once again, Frank looked human.
And that the hyperbole that surrounds him has more to do with his promoter and the stable he's with than Frank himself. Frank the boxer, who started applying pressure in the latter half of the fight.
Derek James urging his man on as the fight felt like it was slipping away. We saw Frank get very aggressive in the last couple of rounds, putting pressure on Artem. Artem, who up until that point had only been 12 rounds once. He only went the distance once, and it was a fight where he faded down the stretch. It seems that was consistent yesterday, in yesterday's fight, as Artem
got on his bike,
not having the same spice that he had in the early goings of the fight. In the latter portion of it, he was moving lateral, bobbing and weaving under sweeping shots from Frank Martin. He was making Frank miss a lot of punches and getting off some good counter right hands.
Doing a good job of offsetting at least some of the aggression from Frank Martin.
And showing that Olympic pedigree, Artem is an Olympic bronze medalist after all. This ain't no club fighter. Better still, Frank Martin poured it on thick in the last couple of rounds. He knew he couldn't afford to lose anymore, and he put the squeeze on Artem, forced him to take a knee in the 12th and final round, which to some may very well have cost Artem the fight. Though if nothing else, Artem showed that Frank is human.
That's the takeaway.
That a lot of guys jumping on the Frank Martin bandwagon are doing so not necessarily because of Frank or any fight that he had or something that he did, but for the simple fact that he is promoted by Errol Spence Jr. and trained by Derek James.
Is that supposed to make him special?
I don't think Frank Martin is a bad fighter. I think he shows good fundamentals, strong.
He's a strong puncher.
No, I don't know for sure, but it looked a lot to me like in the last 2 rounds, I believe it was, looked a lot to me like he fractured Artem's orbital bone, that left eye. That left eye was bothering him.
Frank's all right.
But the hyperbole associated with Frank Martin as of late really does have more to do with Errol Spence Jr. and Derek James than Frank Martin. I've seen guys say things like he'd beat Shakur and he'd beat Keyshawn Davis or Devin Haney. The guy I saw yesterday doesn't beat any of those guys.
Frank is good. He's not great.
He's a solid fighter, and I actually think his late rally was admirable, showing grit and determination, feeling that he needed to bank those last couple of rounds. That's what he did. He put a lot of pressure on Artem.
He dug deep.
But I don't see anything in Frank Martin that either Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney, or even young Keyshawn Davis have to worry about. He's lacking that extra, that X factor, that indefinable quality that many times distinguishes good fighters, all right fighters, from great fighters.
He's all right.
He's solid. And there are some interesting matchups out there for him. He's a good, serviceable, unbeaten fighter. And I look forward to more of his fights. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because most of the hype around Frank Martin has more to do with his promoter and his trainer than Frank himself.
The guys hyping him up aren't boxing fans, they're cheerleaders.
Based on what side of the street he fights on, under what promotional banner, and who his promoter is, who his trainer is, do you think that Shakur Stevenson or Keyshawn Davis could afford to go out there and look how Frank Martin looked without being lambasted for it, without being criticized by the same people that are making excuses for Frank?
You guys are fucking hypocrites.
Pom-pom waving cheerleaders who think that because he's associated with Errol Spence, that automatically makes him special, better, a cut above the other fighters at this weight. I see a guy in Frank that Shakur Stevenson would outpoint easily, and even here and now, in the early stages of Keyshawn Davis's career, I'd pick Keyshawn to beat this guy.
I would.
Treating boxing like it's a team sport, like Errol Spence Jr. and Derek James are going to go in there with Frank and fight the fight for him, help him do it in the ring once the bell sounds. It's up to Frank.
Not them.
It's up to him. And while he is a good, serviceable fighter, I still look at him as being a cut below Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney and even Keyshawn Davis. He ain't got the ceiling they've got.
I said that after the Marinas fight.
I think he's very fortunate to still be an unbeaten fighter here today. There is a legitimate argument that Artem did enough to secure the W yesterday, though before the judges' scorecards were read, me being the cynical boxing fan that I am, I knew Artem's not going to get the nod. Frank is the house fighter. He'll get the decision, but he's very fortunate.
Very lucky.
So there isn't anybody else, any other champion to fight.
What about Makhmudov? What does he rank?
Number 5.
Number 5 in the WBC.
Arslanbek Makhmudov or Frank Sanchez. They're 4 and 5, Frank.
Yeah. I mean, what planet are you on? We're in the business of selling events here. So there isn't anybody else, any other champion to fight.
It's the only justification that Frank Warren can give when he's made the same recommendations by Adam Catterall and Gareth Davies that I've made here on the channel several times, that there are other fighters out there. The heavyweight landscape is not limited to just 1 or 2 fighters. It's not just Anthony Joshua or Alexander Usyk or Andy Ruiz. There are a sea of fighters out there that would be happy to take on Tyson Fury at some point, and Frank's only justification is that because they're in the business of selling events, those contenders aren't worthy.
Because Tyson Fury can't make a fuck ton of money fighting a Makhmudov or a Frankie Sanchez, why should either of those legitimate boxers get a legitimate title shot? Why should Tyson Fury even fight in a legitimate fight when he can make more money fighting in a circus?
The WBC being complicit with this chicanery, instead of moving down their own rank standings to crown a new mandatory challenger, they instead elected to opt out. They're not crowning one altogether, so that Tyson Fury can have his pick of the litter with impunity, making a joke of the sport and a joke of the organization. If this is one of the most recognizable faces in the sport, what does it say about it?
I said it in my previous video that late last year, we found ourselves asking the same question that we're asking now. Of all the people that are out there in the heavyweight division, why fight Derek Chisora? And this is actually a step down from that, the only justification being that it makes for a big event, a big show.
You thought that Derek Chisora was a lighter touch late last year? What do you call this? He's boxing a guy that ain't ever boxed.
This is worse.
Frank Warren inadvertently admitting that if Tyson Fury fights a legitimate boxer, a guy like a Makhmudov or a Frankie Sanchez, it is in fact a smaller show. A much smaller show than doing a circus fight with an MMA fighter.
Because Fury can't sell it by himself. Fury is not so big a name, so beloved and so adored that everything he touches turns into gold. A fight with a Makhmudov is a legitimate fight, a legitimate boxing match, but Tyson Fury don't get out of bed for those.
Do you think for a second that if they offered Arslanbek Makhmudov, a Frankie Sanchez, a Martin Bakoli, a Fury fight, they wouldn't jump at it? They wouldn't jump at the chance? Of course they would. But Tyson Fury, so long as he's champion, he's very selective about what he's doing, and the sport suffers for it. There's nothing to promote here, nothing to celebrate.
This is not a fight. Ngannou is not a boxer.
And if you have to resort to fighting non-boxers based on their celebrity and their drawing power, that's a bold statement about your own. That's basically saying that your name don't carry enough value that you can fight just anybody and carry the show.
Not just anybody.
Saw Canelo Alvarez fight his mandatory challenger in John Ryder, a little-known fighter to the Mexican-American fans and the Mexicans themselves, but he had enough marquee value that just because he was fighting, everybody show up, and at least 450,000 people here in America bought the pay-per-view. Now that's marquee value, that's drawing power, and that's what Tyson Fury don't have because he's not so beloved.
If he can't get a massive purse, he don't get out of bed. And the problem is there are legitimate contenders out there that they're good fighters, but they won't get you a massive purse. They won't get you a massive payday. So you should stop boxing boxers?
I mean, is that the rationale? Is that the logic that Frank is employing? That unless the contenders opposite the ring, Tyson Fury, make for a massive show, Tyson Fury, well, he shouldn't box them. He shouldn't even box with boxers.
You know, Alexander Povetkin wasn't exactly Julio Iglesias when Anthony Joshua fought him, but he still fought him. The same applies to Kubrat Pulev.
And Carlos Takam. That at no point did Anthony stop boxing with real boxers on the premise that they had no marquee value. So why does Tyson Fury get a pass?
Because he's a chicken shit.
How many times did you hear me say the last couple of weeks that Tyson Fury's not looking for a keep busy fight, a tickover en route to Usyk? He's looking for an alternative to Usyk. Another big fight, whatever it might be, so he doesn't have to fight him.
Even if he has to resort to fighting an MMA fighter, even if he's boxing someone that never boxed.
And if you're expecting that he's going to go in there with Ngannou and make approximately 7 or 8 figures as a result, if you're expecting that after that he's going to start taking risks again,
You're fucking naive.
Francis Ngannou, well known in the mixed martial arts community, he's about as well known to MMA fans as Usyk is to boxing fans.
So spare me the Usyk is a nobody routine.
You're just fucking scared.
You're scared to lose.